Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Talk to Brazil, the Business Connection, a leading business podcast, talks with successful business experts about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my studio in Brazil. Today's guest is Alicia Pierre, author of the world's first book on business infrastructure, joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Alicia Butler Pierre is founder and CEO of Equilibria, a global operations management firm, speaker, podcast producer, and host. As a Lean Six Sigma black belt, still finds time to be an instructor at Purdue University. So Alicia, what are the 4 key questions a business leader should answer when intentionally scaling a business?
Well, Tom, first, I must thank you for allowing me to share this wonderful platform with you. It is truly an honor and a privilege. The 4 questions that any small business owner should be able to answer, especially if you're serious about scaling, is number 1, what are the key tasks or activities that have to be performed in your company? And believe it or not, Tom, the answer to that question is foundational to everything else about how you literally organize all of those back office operations. Number 2, how do you actually organize those activities or those tasks into departments? Number 3, who will actually perform the work? So a lot of times when we start our businesses, we are wearing those proverbial many hats.
Right.
We are the founder, we're the CEO, we are the dishwasher, we are the street sweeper, we're doing everything. Mm-hmm. But ideally, who should be doing those different tasks and activities? And then lastly, how is that work performed? So that's when we're really getting into those processes, those procedures, so that as you do have the fortune of being able to have maybe more business than you can handle and you realize you need to add more people to your team, how are you actually going to share that knowledge of what you do and how you do it with those new team members? We can't communicate telepathically, unfortunately.
Right.
We have to make sure it's documented somewhere, even if it's just in a video format. You can take your phone and record yourself speaking, or maybe do a quick video. You and I were talking behind the scenes about TikTok. You might even be able to leverage TikTok as training videos. But the point is, get all of that information out of your head and into some form of documentation that can be shared with other people.
Well, that's actually the scary part. All 4 of those are scary because from a small business owner, I started my own business. I had an idea, as many people do. You really don't think beyond the idea that you have. We don't think about all these other points that you said.
I know.
So, like what happens if it's right? What happens if I'm successful? Who are the people? You say, who's going to perform it? How are they going to do it? How am I going to organize that? To be honest, those weren't things I thought about. I just wanted to see if my idea was plausible, if it could work.
And that's a great point. And that's why we actually, at my company, we don't specialize in working with startups because of that very reason, Tom. When you're starting, you're just trying to figure it all out. A lot of times we might start off having a business plan, but as you and I both know, what we think will happen won't necessarily happen the way that we think it will. It's not until we actually get out there and we start selling our goods and services and we listen to the feedback from our customers. Mm-hmm. And that's what really dictates, okay, we thought they wanted this, but they actually want something else. And our job as entrepreneurs is we either listen or we don't. And if we don't listen, we know that's to our own detriment. But if we do listen, if we're smart and we actually listen, because that's the best type of feedback, is directly from your customers. And if they're telling you, Tom, you provided this to me in the color blue, but I really want it in yellow.
Right.
And if you are just insistent, no, I wanted it blue, this is what I wrote in my business plan, and we're going to stick to it being blue, then you'll be out of business very quickly. But if you change gears and you say, you know what, I'm getting this feedback from multiple people about the same thing. They want yellow. Okay, we have to change it to yellow. And then it just kind of takes off from there. And you being the king of networking, you're right. So what starts to happen is, as you're listening to what your customers really want, you're making those adjustments to your whatever your products or your services are, and you're out there networking. You're on places like TikTok and Facebook and LinkedIn. You have all of these promotional things that you're doing. Well, then you might realize you have another problem. You go from not having enough customers to maybe having too many, because you've done such a good job of listening to what the marketplace is telling you they want, and you're doing a great job at promoting and publicizing your business. Now you have to take a look at, oh my gosh, how can I make sure that I can meet the demand, the growing demand for my goods and services? And that's at the point, Tom, where my company likes to come in and work with those types of small businesses, because truthfully, it's easier to have that conversation. But when we're talking to a startup, you're absolutely right. You're just trying to figure it all out. But once
not only figure it all out, I think many times we feel that we can do it by ourselves.
Yes,
that is very true. We have
true.
been taught that it's not a one-man show; it's a one-person thing, and that you can. So there are persons out there saying that you can do it by yourself, but that's easier said than done.
That is a fact. And even I remember being asked a couple of years ago about whether or not I agreed with the term solopreneur, the idea of exactly what you're saying, going at it all alone. But I always say, even if you think you're the only person in your company, chances are there are still some other people that you consult with, even though they may not necessarily be employees or even people that work with you part-time. There are other resources that you usually are tapping into.
Right.
Even if you go onto a website like Fiverr.com and you just need some assistance with graphic design work. That person isn't necessarily a part of your core team, but that is still a resource that you are tapping into. You're not doing that work yourself. There's someone else out there who might have a certain type of expertise that you may not have, and you realize your learning curve, it would be too steep. And it just makes sense that if there's a graphic designer there on Fiverr who can create a beautiful promotional artwork that you can leverage on social media, maybe even have it printed, then it makes sense to do that. So that's an example of how these are people who are extensions of a potential team, even though in your mind, you may think you are doing everything by yourself. And you may also you may receive legal advice from attorneys or lawyers. You may also receive accounting advice from an accountant. And again, these are not necessarily people that you hire full time, because most of us, we can't afford to bring on an accountant full time, but we can certainly seek their advice and their counsel on an as-needed basis. So I actually consider people like that to be a part of your team. They may not, again, be a part of your everyday core team, but they are still people that you consult with to help you make decisions in your business.
I agree with you. Another part of what I've done with my beginning, being part of business associations. Here in Brazil, I'm part of the American Chamber. There are local business associations for commerce, industry, retail, and I'm part of those. I've been part. Peer groups I've been part of. And really what I found, my comfort came from what you said. If we don't listen, we're part of the 90% that fail in the first year. If we do listen, it doesn't mean it's immediate success, but it was listening in my case, because I had no money to do all that. But through these associations, knowing persons, people who were speakers who came and talked, whatever, and even the lawyers and the accountants that you mentioned were part of these groups. And you could hear their stories about something that was similar to mine at the beginning. And so part of that I could adapt. If you say, hey, look, these are the things you know. Well, you just said you just get 4 things what we need to know, the questions that we have to ask and answer before we start. And that was a help. My networking, I say back to why do I network? What do I get from it? Is exactly that, contact with people who know more than I do.
Yes.
They say if you're the expert in the room, you're in the wrong room. Get out of it. So that was part of it, just being around people who have succeeded, people in companies who have failed. That's part of the process, and getting that feedback. But asking first, and what I did learn, don't go to the market with your idea. Just take your idea and run it around the table, the room, not necessarily even with your relatives. I found that, in home around the dinner table is probably not the best place to do that. In my case, it wasn't, because everybody would give me 14,000 reasons why it wouldn't work.
Exactly.
And that was before I put gravy on the potatoes. So sometimes we have to get out of where we are, get out of our culturally where we are. When I first ran Talk to Brazil around these groups, when I started Talk to Brazil as an internet radio program, I ran it through some of these groups, but they were all here in Brazil. And they didn't have a model to equate to what I was actually doing. Internet radio didn't exist in Brazil at that time.
Okay.
So I had, and through LinkedIn, I found other connections that I had and listened to them. Why were they doing what they were doing? And they were doing it in the States at that time. And I learned from them. And I said, hey, that's something that I think I can do. And I asked them, why are you doing that? The first person I asked, he says, I need to generate traffic back to my site. I need to generate content. And this is years ago, so content is king. So how can I generate content? It's what we're doing right now. We are generating content, talking to people. And
Absolutely.
At that time, so I have to sit down and I have to write content. I have to keep putting it and publishing it on my site. That's time consuming. Back to what you said, I need somebody to help me do that. I need more computers. I need more whatever. And he says, I found internet radio, and this is why I do it. He says, wow. So sometimes we have to get out of our own ballpark and play another game.
Yes. And get out of our own way. And because a lot of times we think because we may have conducted some type of research, and so we think we know the answer, but the market, your customers will always tell you exactly what they want and how they want it.
Well, and to that same point, you are a global person now. Right?
Yes.
And you've gotten out of your own backyard.
Yes, I have.
So how are you structured now looking out to this world?
It is the best thing I could have ever done, Tom. And I'll tell you why I started to do it is because as you've mentioned, what I do is very technical. And when we talk about being lean, especially when it comes to American culture, it's really antithetical to the American way of life, because Americans are consumers.
Right. And
so there's this mindset or this mentality that, well, there's always going to be enough. There's an unlimited supply of resources. Whereas in other countries around the world, they know that that's not true. There's a finite number of resources. We need to use only what we need and not be wasteful. And so I always had that suspicion, Tom, that, you know what, I think what I talk about, what I do through my business and how I do it, I think it would be better well received in other countries outside of the US.
True.
And sure enough, through my own podcast, you would love this. That's how I started networking and meeting other people around the world. And sure enough, bing, they get it. There's no need to belabor any points. There's no need to convince them of the value. They get it. They understand it. And what has happened is I have now been able, thanks to COVID, because when all of us were forced to do things remotely, I had been trying to do that, Tom, for years. I had been a Zoom user, for example, for years before COVID. But now COVID forced all of us to really start to learn, whether we wanted to or not, learn all of these different digital technologies.
Right.
And become more receptive to the idea of being able to work remotely and trusting your other team members. And so I started building a team. I have people that work in the Philippines, Nigeria, and most recently, India, also here in the US as well. So it's actually 4 countries now.
Well, it's
So
24/7.
And it's very interesting navigating the time zones, as you can appreciate. But it's been absolutely phenomenal because there are certain things that are just universal to business. That's one thing I've learned. The other thing that I've learned personally, Tom, is that there are certain places in the world where there is a true hunger and craving for the knowledge.
Right.
Here in the US, we have so many resources, many of them free for small businesses to learn about how to start your YouTube channel, how to promote your business, how to create your LinkedIn profile. All of these different resources that truthfully we take for granted. But when I'm going into
they all work. You say
they all work.
Successful. They drop shipping. That's a concept that works.
They do work, but and the reason I say we take it for granted is because as I have expanded my outreach to other countries, they don't have those resources necessarily, or they may not be as much in abundance as it is here in the States. And what I'm finding is that, again, people in general are much more receptive to the information and the educational materials and content that my company provides in comparison to the people that I come across here in the States. And so that has been such a beautiful thing to see, and to have these different perspectives, to, again, make sure you're using language that is universal in nature, something that most people can relate to.
Right.
It's really forced me to do an even better job of how I communicate. So I
think
been
that's
phenomenal.
the most important point that you just mentioned in globalization. We have to adapt how we communicate. Because communication is not one thing. It's not one language anymore. And even within one language, it's not the same language. English is different. The usage, the way it's said, the way it's understood, and specifically to that, there are more English language speakers that speak as a second language out there in this world that you know. So adapting, and I'm an American, so I've had to adapt how I say things. If I'm speaking to you as an American, I can speak quickly, I can use a different word usage probably than I would if I were speaking to another person. I learned that here in Brazil. So I have to simplify my communication in a way that it guarantees reach.
Yes.
If we don't think about that, we sort of overpower many people.
Indeed.
They're not actually listening or hearing anymore. You can see that when their eyes pop up and their jaw drops. And I say, maybe they're not understanding what I'm saying. So slow it down. It's maybe in the old days when we had the 78 RPM records, they just bring that down to 33 and help people out. Seriously, that's part of communication.
And part of it too is recognizing how many cliches and idioms may be a part of your everyday speech.
Right.
Things that we are, there's certain local expressions. For example, for me in the United States, I'm originally from Louisiana. And so I always say it's almost like a country within a country, because we have our own food, we have our own language, we have our own music. It's very different. And so there are certain things that we say there that when I'm here in Atlanta, if I were to say those things, I would be met with looks of confusion. So I try to be mindful of those types of things also, that there are, and this is true around the world, there's certain expressions that just can't be translated
Can't be.
from one language to another.
I'm from Pittsburgh, so in Pittsburgh, it's in the South it's y'all, and in Pittsburgh it's yins. So it's and that's the way it goes. And even in Brazil is a continental country.
Oh yes,
and
Brazil
it's
is
different
huge.
from everywhere, from the south to the north, and the word usage, the culture and foods, what you said, how things are done. It's all different. But we have to recognize, Amsterdam. If you go into Holland or Denmark, and I found this when I traveled to Europe, what people think in a country of what size is all about. And I remember one of the first times I went to Holland, and then people picked me up and says, "We're going to go north tomorrow." All right, going north for me is like a 4-hour flight in Brazil, but for them it was 28 kilometers.
Wow.
I said, "Wow," and that was going north. That was it. 32 kilometers, you're out the other side of the country, but it's all relative. So we need, in a global business, we have to understand. And the United States continental. We talk Australia, it's continental. We're talking big. Everything's big. Canada, it's all big. But we do need to have an appreciation for local, for micro.
Yes,
The microculture, and the blue and the yellow that you referred to. Today, it's what is the shade?
that is true.
What's the
That is
shade?
very
It's
true.
not just blue.
As my niece discovered with her T-shirt business. She's a teenager. She started a T-shirt business during COVID. Everyone was at home bored, and I remember her very first customer said he wanted blue shirts.
Right.
And it came down to shade. Sure enough, she chose a shade, and he said, "No, I wanted a darker blue, not this richer,
blue.
vibrant blue that you've provided." So no, that is absolutely true. It's absolutely true. So we have to be very, Tom, I have learned that we almost have to speak. This is going to sound so crazy, but we almost have to speak as though we are robots, as though we are talking to a computer, because computers, you and I were having this conversation before we started the interview about voice, how did you put it? Voice searchable content.
Voice searchable content.
And we have to make sure that when we speak that we are clear, that we are articulate, because if we take this audio recording, for example, and we upload it into a software that can create a transcript, the clearer we are when we speak, the better a job the technology will do in actually generating that transcript. But if we aren't clear, if we keep saying, the robot is just like, I don't know what they're saying. And it makes our job of cleaning up that transcript, it takes us even longer.
But to that point, and that's for everybody, two sides of, it's teaching and learning, all right? Today, the robots are learning, and we as voice generators of content, we're teaching. So the more occasions that we can say what we say, no matter how we say it, the more opportunity the robots have to adapt whatever it is that Alicia says and Tom says, to really, it's Tom speak and Alicia speak. And when we speak, they'll pick that up. They'll bring that sound back to us. And we will be found because of that. But we need, and I say this to people, pick up your phone in the morning and talk to it. Do a voice search of your own name. Ask, Google. I do that because my last name, Reaoch, is very difficult to pronounce. And until today, when I ask Google, Tom Reaoch, I get a whole bunch of answers that aren't me. And what do I decide? So I'm just not teaching it enough. I have to do it more. I have to teach more to Google. So I have to wake up and say, Google, you're not doing it right. Because someday people are looking for Tom Reaoch and they can't find me. And so what you do and I do in podcasting, we're generating that same voice. It's that same voice content that's going out there. It's repetitive. Some people like it, some people don't. Some robots like it, some robots don't. But that's real life. But we shouldn't stop doing that. We shouldn't, and that's anybody. A new business person should not stop generating content, because the competition out there in the world is fierce.
Indeed.
So you just can't be, besides listening, we need to speak.
I agree.
And speak more. And you do that very well. As an author, you write. As a speaker, you speak. As a teacher, you teach. Right? As a podcast producer and host, you host. So you actually have wrapped your whole mind and body around communication.
And thank you for recognizing that, because I've been criticized for that. But I will tell you this, Tom, and for your listeners, I started a LinkedIn newsletter, even though I had a regular company newsletter. Mm-hmm. But I started doing that as soon as I was able to activate the creator mode in LinkedIn. And I am committed. I write a weekly newsletter. I have received quite a bit of business as a result of that newsletter. So this is why people like you and I do what we do, because you never know where people will search. You never know how they will search, and you never know when you might actually write something or say something at the exact moment when someone out there in the world needs that information.
Right.
They will then reach out to you, look you up online, find your website, find you on Facebook, find you on Twitter, wherever you are online, and they will reach out to you. Trust me. But it is the long game, as you know, Tom.
It's the long game.
It is the long game. And I think this is why so many people question folks like us, like, why do you even bother? But I often tell people, well, think about it. If you're spending money in advertisements, Google ads, YouTube ads, maybe you're putting ads on Facebook, whatever you're doing to promote your business, you're paying money for that.
Right.
Well, people like you and I, we're paying with our time in creating the content. So to me, it's the same thing. And it's really about experimenting and figuring out what is your formula for your company's success. And it looks different for every business. But, you've encouraged me to start going on TikTok. And so we'll have to add that as part of our experimentation and figure out, maybe there is something there, but we'll never know unless we try.
That's the thing. We need to try.
And we have to do it for longer than a couple of weeks.
Right. And wait for the feedback to come.
Correct.
I was recently interviewed on a point that I like to make. This is why you encompass what I had said in the other interview. We as business leaders, as business owners, we are the voice of the company. We are the face of the company. But more than that, we are the heart and soul of the company. And we need to show the face, the voice, the heart, and the soul. And that's multi-platform, and that's constantly, and that's forever, because companies like yours, and what I do, it should be the long game. We should be here forever. It's not, the short game. It's not, I'm here to get it up and going and then I want to sell it. No. I'm here, I've been here, and if anybody could ever find me, I hope to still be here. And many times we look for people in network, we can't find them anymore.
That's true. That has happened.
We can remember somebody, and you know that very well, and even before the pandemic, but during and even now. Companies being bought, being sold, changing their name, changing whatever. Those persons who work for these companies, they have to change their whole identity. So what I sell and what I am, I'm Tom Reaoch. You're Alicia, right? You're Alicia Butler Pierre. That's who we are, and that's who we're going to be forever.
Right.
Whether we're on this podcast, on another, and you're in your company. So we have to sell ourselves as ourselves. And I think that's for any business person.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Tom. Regardless of what industry your business is in, and regardless of what it is that you are selling. Because people, and I know you this may be a part of your mantra or your motto, but a huge part of networking is people understanding that at the end of the day, people do business with others that they know,
Right.
like, and trust.
That's it.
And so there's something about the way our brains work as human beings. The more, if I start seeing Tom Reaoch coming up over and over and over wherever I am, whether it's in my email inbox, whether I'm looking at my phone and I receive these notifications, it could be on WhatsApp, it could be on, it could be anywhere.
Right.
And if I keep seeing Tom's name, in my mind, I'm thinking, I know Tom. I've listened to Tom on his podcast. I'm familiar with his voice. I've seen him on YouTube. I've seen him on TikTok. I know Tom.
Right.
I like Tom. Therefore, I trust him. And so now when that moment comes and I am ready to do business with Tom, because I've seen and I've been exposed to so much of your content, I feel as though I know you and I like you, then of course I can do business with you.
Oh, a referral, because you and I may never do business together. All right, I'm not considering this as a podcast host, and it's part of business. It's business. But what has happened to me in my lifetime? People find me to ask me, "Do you know somebody? Do you know anybody who?" And that's how it comes. Do you know anybody who? And that who could be anything.
Like I already have thought of someone that I want to introduce you to, and she is a native Brazilian.
Very good.
Which is even better.
I'll interview her in Portuguese. All right.
Oh, that would be a lot of fun. So yes, all of these things are important, and it all requires process because it requires being consistent. Mm-hmm. It is. You have to have that commitment to be consistent. So if you start something, for example, with podcasting, there's a term called pod fade. And it's the idea that most people who start a podcast, because they're thinking, well, Tom and Alicia, they're on Google Meets, they're in Google Hangouts, they both have a microphone, they're talking. How difficult could that be? Well, they don't have an understanding of all of the other things that happen behind the scenes. Right. There's the pre-interview process, there's the interview process, and then there's the post-interview process. And then we haven't even scratched the surface on all of the things that you and your company, your team are doing to actually promote the show. So once people realize, oh my gosh, this is actually a lot of work,
it is.
They fade out. After about, on average, after about 6 to 8 episodes, they stop.
That's
because
true.
They realize, oh my goodness, this is work.
It's work.
But because you and I are consistent, and the best way to ensure that consistency is to have those processes.
And it's back to what you said at the beginning. Understand the tasks and activity, right?
Exactly.
Organize, number 2. 3, who performs?
Correct.
Performs? And number 4, how?
How do you do it?
How do you do it?
How do you do it, Tom?
Well, number 4 actually becomes for me, it's become the ballast, because it's the how changes every day. You keep learning how. The process orientation of streamlining, of lean, as you mentioned. It's redoing the same process that you find how to do that process better, more productive, and whatever. And that's to podcasting. That's what we do. That's what anybody does. That's to the T-shirts.
Yes.
It's to anything. So it's not to one thing.
It's constantly improving, continuously improving, and being open to changing and evolving.
Right. And
because
to
again,
that, Alicia, how can our listeners find you?
The best way is, 2 ways. Through my website, which is eqbsystems.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out. That's where I hang out the most, Tom. I do have a presence on some of those other platforms, but if you want to reach out to me personally, that is definitely the best way.
Very good. I want to thank you for sharing your time, your energy, your heart, and your soul. That's all important.
Obrigada. See? Aha!
Quick learner. So thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, and to our listeners, it's more about Alicia Butler Pierre, and it's Alicia Butler, and the last name Pierre. Alicia Butler Pierre. She's on LinkedIn and Equilibria, which is eqbsystems.com. eqbsystems.com. I'd like to thank you, our audience, and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their website, focusmi.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.